All right, well, let's talk about some things, shall we? Yes, I am back. I did a video yesterday about things getting hot in the Panama Canal. I was just doing some research on that. I didn't mean to say that. I meant to say the Persian Gulf. And we have a war in the Persian Gulf. This is the real thing, folks. People are saying, "Oh, this is World War III." Probably. People were also saying that World War III began about 2 years ago. So it's possible. Let me adjust this a little bit. It's possible that we've been in that frame of mind for a little while. I am sufficiently concerned about it that I'm going to do videos on this for a little while as it occurs to me. I think that there's a lot that's not going to be discussed that maybe I can bring some value to because of my different perspective on global affairs. I think that global heating is our biggest problem, and I think that also fossil fuel use is also tied to that global heating. So we're going to have some real problems in 2026 as we try and fail to reconcile all of these things. This isn't 2026 is going to become dominated by what we call a polycrisis. A polycrisis is when you have more than one bad thing going on at a time. In fact, my novel Ariadne, I'll just throw this up. It's part of my outline, so I can throw this up. I'll come back to this in a minute. I probably should have straightened this out ahead of time, but I didn't do it. Get rid of this. And yeah, sorry. I'm being silly. Here we go. I actually go ahead and quote the idea of the polycrisis, and it's in the front of the book. I'll enlarge this one more time. I'm making a big deal out of this and taking all this time and interrupting the flow of the video because I just remembered that this is going to be a theme for 2026. So we may as well start getting used to the idea. Okay. Polycrisis definition: the noun, a time of great disagreement, confusion, or suffering that is caused by many different problems happening at the same time, so that they together have a very big effect. In a polycrisis, you don't just have like one problem and then two and then three. You have one problem that creates two or three more problems, and then each of those two or three more problems creates themselves two or three more problems. So your polycrisis grows exponentially. It's not linear. And for humans, this is a problem because we don't understand exponential growth. We don't understand chaotic systems. We don't understand the importance of chaos. Humans don't understand that there is actually a mathematical model of chaos, and that chaos is well understood. And chaos, even though it's chaotic, is actually predictable. And the impacts of chaos can even be predictable. The three-body problem, to pick one, is a chaotic system. And yet we fly spacecraft around the Earth-Moon system, Earth-Moon-Sun system all the time, and including the other planets. And these are all three-body problems, or even more than three-body. But it's completely chaotic. We have the same problem here on Earth with all these nations and all these conflicts. These are multipolar crises, and they impact each other and they augment each other in ways that are non-linear and chaotic. The chaos can actually be predictable, but it's still chaotic. And I have a second thing here. That first thing was the Cambridge dictionary, and I have the URL there if you want to look it up. And then I have another thing. I just basically asked Gemini, so what's a polycrisis? And what it had to say was the 2025 polycrisis, and I did the query in 2025, but now we're in 2026. The 2025 polycrisis is defined by the convergence of interconnected, cascading global risks that amplify one another. Amplify one another. Not replace one another, not happen at the same time. Amplify. Okay, it's a runaway system, creating a perfect storm that threatens to overwhelm international systems. Major drivers in 2025, now we're in 2026, so nothing has really changed, include escalating geopolitical tensions, for example, Ukraine, Middle East, and Taiwan. Here we are. Climate-driven disasters, AI-driven volatility, and severe social political instability in Western nations. So that was the polycrisis at the end of 2025 when I started this book. It just got worse. Everything has taken off. So now we're in a polycrisis. This is my new book, Ariadne, a cautionary tale about the rise of artificial intelligence and the fall of civilization, told in 3 parts. That's kind of my working subtitle. But the truth is, I'm writing a documentary here. Ariadne is almost certainly a documentary. In kind of the same way that again, switching gears here, my first book runs the risk of becoming a documentary. It was 100 Days. Available. Link is in the description if you're interested in it. People seem to enjoy the ebook, but it's also available in paperback and hardback, priced to move. So you're getting the best pricing I could get out of Amazon. Again, a polycrisis, and this. So I've been thinking about these types of problems for a while now, and we're now in for it. So what do I want to talk about today? 2026 is going to become a year of polycrisis. You could even say that the 2020s is the decade of polycrisis, right? Didn't we have a pandemic? Didn't we have trade wars in the second Trump administration, really in the first? Didn't we have all this rumor of war between China and Taiwan and China and the Philippines, and of course we had the Russia-Ukraine war spilled over. Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, but then they invaded Ukraine proper in the 2020s, in that decade. So this is going to be a decade of polycrisis. Ariadne, actually, what is it? The end of it takes place in 2031. So we just barely get out of the 2020s before the book ends. And a good part of the book itself, Ariadne, takes place in 2027 up to 2030. So I think we're on glide path to have a very bad decade. And how does the decade end? Well, right now it's ending in the Third World War. So in the description to this video, I list all the ways that we are now in the Third World War. Some people started saying we were in the Third World War about 2 years ago because Europe was supporting Ukraine against Russia. And then China and North Korea and Iran were supporting Russia in Ukraine, in the Ukrainian war. Iran was sending munitions, Korea was sending munitions, and China basically was sending money because they were buying Russian oil on the black market, and helping Russia to fund its war in Ukraine. So it was kind of shaping up to be a Third World War, all being fought in Ukraine, and everyone else kind of in the wings, throwing things into the Ukrainian theater. But now we're just full-on Third World War. And so how does this proceed? At the same time that all of this is proceeding, there's something really terrible happening in the Earth system. It's kind of a coincidence, but it doesn't have to be coincidental. And these two things can actually be tied together. The kinetic war that's now erupting basically across the planet. And it will continue to do so until every nation on earth is involved. This kinetic war is in some ways tied to what I do cover on this channel a lot, which is global heating. And how is that the case? Global heating leads to the failure of nation states. As nations begin to bake in the heat, then the people begin to rebel. And where does this happen? This can happen in North Africa. This can happen in Egypt. It can happen in parts of the Middle East. They're having disasters in all parts of the world. You don't hear about them in the media. If you're European or if you're a U.S. citizen watching your local media, you're not going to hear about these things because the media doesn't cover these kinds of world events. I shouldn't say that. The BBC tends to do a decent job, as does DW, and those are two of the international media sources that I do enjoy, and I'm generally pretty impressed that they do cover the international scene. Here in the U.S., we get nothing. I mean, zero. We get zero. Well, we understand that we just bombed Iran, but that's because we bombed Iran. The U.S. bombed Iran, so we hear about that. But if someone else bombed Iran, we probably wouldn't. Pakistan just went to war with Afghanistan. That's covered a little bit in the media, but for the most part, Americans will never hear anything about it. Americans wouldn't hear anything if the Chinese invaded Taiwan. Americans probably wouldn't hear anything about it if North Korea started bombing South Korea. We just don't get to hear about these things. Why? I think Americans don't care. I think Americans don't even know where these places are. Most Americans can't find Korea, Taiwan, China, Pakistan on a map. If they had the map in front of them, they couldn't. They would have a hard time pointing to these countries. Even with the labels, they would have a hard time finding these countries on the map. Even if China on the map is labeled China, most Americans couldn't find China on a map. I know that sounds bizarre, but that's just the truth. We as a nation are so impoverished intellectually that those are all true statements. So America is not going to be engaged with any of this, except that, of course, we have the biggest military in the world, especially now that Russia is heavily engaged in Europe. Our military is, will be stretched thin, but we still have the biggest military in the world. And so now we've helped start the Third World War. This is going to expand, and it's really easy for other countries to jump in if they're suffering from heat-related calamities. It's worth saying at this point that Iran, in addition to having problems with their nuclear program, and Israel and Hezbollah and Hamas in Gaza and the Houthi in Yemen and a bunch of other things that they have their sticky fingers in, pies that they are working with. Iran has another problem that almost nobody hears about. They've run out of water, in particular in Tehran, the capital city. Just flat ran out of water. Some of it was mismanagement of their water resources. Some fairly bizarre water practices that I wouldn't have thought would have been a problem. Turned out they were a problem, and I guess they didn't think that would be a problem either, but turns out they were. They built too many reservoirs. Hard to imagine, but they did. And then Tehran, the capital city, has essentially run out of water. They're pretty much at day zero. I don't know how they're providing water to their people now. It's being done with trucks, and maybe that will continue for a little while, but eventually there's about 15 million people. I think it's like 8 million in the city proper, and then another 8 million just outside the city in the metropolitan area. So Tehran is running out of water, or has run out of water, and there's 15 million people or so that are swept up in that crisis. Well, this is Iran, right? And now Iran is being rocketed by the U.S. and Israel for whatever reason. Plus, their people are running out of water. So, and they're running out of water because of global heating and climate change. That's what happened. Yeah, there was some mismanagement, but that's also what happened to them. This is going to be a continued problem. And when authoritarian regimes find themselves pressured by environmental processes that they have no control over, if you're having a mega drought, if you've run out of water, if you've mismanaged your water, now you have no water. There's nothing you can do about that, right? I'm all the time on this channel saying, hey, physics wins, folks. And, if you run out of water, then you don't have any water. Now, maybe you could create some desalinization plants. Maybe you could build nuclear power plants to provide the electricity for those desalinization projects. I don't know. They're an oil exporting country. They could burn crude oil to provide the electricity for desalinization. But, these are not easy projects to create. Iran is existing under sanctions because they're terrorist activities and the support of terrorist regimes. Probably they're just done. So if you end up with, any day now really, 15 million people who don't have water and probably likewise don't have food, then you're in a really bad place. And Iran could easily end up in a very bad place. What happens when they get desperate? They just lost their political leader, Khamenei, but their political leaders are stacked up 10 deep, so they can always just push another one out in front and say, here's your new political leader. And since it's a theocracy, it's not even parliamentary, it's just a theocracy. They can just, wave a magic wand and create a new leader just say that Allah wills it, right? There's no big deal for them. So they never run out of theocratic leaders because they can always just invent another one with the wave of a wand. But they can't bring the water back, right? So as things start to get really ugly in Iran, this whole World War III thing might start to get real serious. Now, Iran does not have nuclear weapons, supposedly, but they were trying to get her nuclear weapons. And for all anyone knows, they do have one. And therefore, I guess, since we're in World War III now, and Iran is facing an existential crisis, more than one, right, the whole poly crisis thing, then, who knows what they're going to do? And you'll say, "Oh, that doesn't make any sense." They won't do that. If they use a nuclear weapon, they'll be glassed. They'll be, maybe they will, but maybe they won't. Also, it doesn't have to be understood to come from Iran. I was watching a video the other day. It was kind of a what if video where a submarine off the U.S. coast, some submarine, no one even knew what kind or whose it was or how it got there, launched a sea-launched ballistic missile and hit Washington, D.C., and then ran away. So who was that? Was that the North Koreans? Was that the Chinese? Was that the Russians? Was it the Iranians? Was it the Russians doing it on behalf of the Iranians? Who really knows? You wouldn't know. You might not know. And you could have a nuclear standoff, and you might not even know who it is you're standing off against. Just all of a sudden, you have nuclear explosions going off in various nations around the world, various capital cities, various port facilities, various naval yards, and you might not even know who it was. And this could go on for, something like this could go on for weeks. You're just playing cat and mouse. And so you can have an actual nuclear dust up. And that was the takeaway of that documentary I was watching, that this is a lot easier to do than you think. The Iranians were trying to get a nuclear weapon. No one knows if they got one or not. Maybe they did and they've just never told anybody. Why would they? And then all of a sudden they have a nuclear weapon. So did they buy it from the Russians? Did they buy it from the Chinese? Did the Chinese give it to them? How will you ever know? It's completely deniable. No one has to ever say, oh yeah, we gave them that. They just have to say, oh, look at that. I guess they were trying to make a nuclear weapon. They had all the uranium and the uranium enrichment and the whole thing. And Donald Trump, Israel bombed Iran in the 12-day war some months ago. And because of all the fear of nuclear weapons, well, they had one. Who knew? And so if they turn out to have one, they might turn out to use one. And let's face it, if they're able to buy one from some corrupt Russian oligarch, then what's to stop them from buying 5? Nothing. As nations like Iran, now facing a polycrisis, what's their polycrisis? They're being bombed by the Israelis. They're being bombed by the Americans. They're running out of water. Their population is in an uproar. They have enemies in the region like Saudi Arabia and Israel that are coming for their head. They're going to have to close the Straits of Hormuz so they can punish all the other Gulf nations who are trying to export oil and natural gas through the Straits of Hormuz. They're going to have to close that, and therefore they're not going to have any income. If they try to sneak out an oil tanker, someone else is going to sink it, so they won't have any income. The Chinese got a lot of their oil from Iran. Again, Iran was supposed to be under sanctions, but the Chinese don't care, so they were just buying the oil anyway. They also buy oil from the Russians, and they were also buying a lot of oil from Venezuela, which the U.S. just attacked and took down and took control of their oil resources. So, what a coincidence. So now the Chinese are running out of oil, and that's not good for them. How long will it take before that starts to interfere with their ability to function? Month? A lot of this oil stuff is what we call JIT, just in time. Now, China is a wealthy nation and strategic, so they probably have, what would they be, tank yards, right? They have tank yards, or even tankers, oil tankers, just moored in port full of oil, just, for the day when we need it. But how long will that last them? I mean, how much oil can they lay up? Now, the Venezuela is offline. Russia is basically offline. Ukraine has been blowing Russia's oil infrastructure back to the Stone Age. And Iran has now been taken offline. Oh, and Saudi Arabia might go offline, right? Because they're in the middle of a war. So where is China supposed to get their oil? They're going to get their oil from the U.S.? They might, actually. Probably it's going to be really expensive, and Donald Trump is going to, really whack them over the head with it, and get concessions and all this kind of stuff. But at some point, they may start running out. Now, this is bad news for the Chinese. They are a manufacturing center for the entire planet. Their income, mostly, almost entirely, comes from manufacturing and then selling goods overseas. Well, if you don't have crude oil in your industrial base because it's been cut off because Venezuela, Iran, Straits of Hormuz, Russia isn't really delivering. The Shadow Fleet is being sank by Ukraine and all these other things. Then, they're looking at a choke point for them. The Chinese are looking at a choke point. Now, they have plans to invade Taiwan. Now, here's a little story for you. In the Second World War, Germany was not an oil-producing nation, and they're not now either. They knew that trying to conquer Europe was going to be impossible if they didn't have access to an oil supply to create fuels and industrial materials to build their war machine. The Soviet Union, under the control of Joseph Stalin at the time, did have in the Caucasus a substantial oil field. And so while Hitler did make peace with Stalin and said, we won't attack you, you won't attack us, and now we're just going to go to war with Europe, Hitler, his war machine started running out of oil. They couldn't get to oil-producing regions nearly fast enough to make up for the oil and fuel resources they were burning in the war. So they had to open up a second front against Russia so they could have a shot at the oil resources in I think it was called Stalingrad at the time. Oh, and there was a big battle at Stalingrad. But the big battle at Stalingrad was not about Stalingrad. It was about the oil. So Hitler kind of went all in to try and make a mad dash into the Soviet Union. Stalin was really surprised. He didn't. Everyone knew that Hitler didn't want to have a second front. And he, in his Mein Kampf, I think he even wrote about that. Don't ever open up a second front. But then he had to, because he needed the oil in the Caucasus. Well, he didn't get it. And that was it. They were done. The war was over, essentially. I mean, it took another 2 years to, beat them back into Germany and end the war with a surrender. But the war basically ended when the German forces couldn't take the oil fields in the south of Russia, in the Caucasus. The Japanese had the same problem. The Japanese were building a war machine, but they don't have oil or coal. At least Germany had coal. They didn't have oil or coal, and so they had to make a mad dash for the oil and coal resources so that they could keep their war machine going. And they tried. They got as far south as they almost got to Australia, and they lots of coal in Australia, but they just couldn't pull it off. And that was the end of the war for them. When they could no longer buy oil on the open market, the U.S. Navy was finally sinking container ships and things like that, oil tankers and coal cargoes, and then the Japanese basically ran out of energy. And then that was the end of the war for them. And the war ended a year or 2 or 3 later, and then atomic bombs and the whole thing. But it was essentially over when they couldn't fuel their war machine. And one of the reasons that the U.S. tends not to lose wars, like the First World War or the Second World War or the Cold War, is because we do have energy resources. We have our own oil, and we have coal, and we have iron ore for steel, and we're a large country and rich in minerals. So it's really easy for the U.S. to kind of fund itself and just kind of keep throwing resources into the pot until whatever we need to do is done. Well, here we go again. So now, fast forward 80 years, and the Third World War. China just got cut off, essentially, from oil supplies. They used to buy oil from Venezuela. That belongs to Donald Trump now. They used to buy oil from Iran. Iran is now in the middle of a war. They're not going to be able to ship oil for a long time. They used to buy oil from Russia. I think there was pipelines for that, and then there was oil tankers. Well, Russia really doesn't have the ability to ship oil anymore. So China is finding itself. Now, what did I just say about World War II? China is finding itself running out of access to reliable sources of oil, crude oil. They have things to manufacture because that's how they make money. They have plans to build a huge military, which they have to have crude oil to do that, both for the manufacturing and to fuel it. And then they plan on invading Taiwan. Now, this is a matter of pride for both China and Xi Jinping, their president. He has said he's going to do that. I think he had a date of 2027 that he wanted the Chinese military to be able to mount an attack on Taiwan and be successful. That was kind of an internal yardstick. Well, he's been steadily degrading his own military, executing his generals, and a bunch of other things, and it's not looking too good. Now, up jumps the devil, right? Now their oil access has been cut off. This is going to interfere with their ability to make money, their ability to build a military, their ability to fuel a military, and their ability to invade Taiwan. So, interesting times we live in, isn't it? So what is China going to do about that? One guess is they invade Taiwan. Let's see, tomorrow afternoon. They might invade Taiwan tomorrow afternoon. And their rationale for doing so would be that everyone's at war. We're just about to run out of oil, and we have something right now. We could invade Taiwan. We kick that out of our hair. If we don't do it now, we'll never have this chance again because no oil. So let's do it now. So we could easily find ourselves, because of the oil problem, but also everything else, just the general environment of conflict, we may find ourselves with a war in between China and Taiwan. Well, Trump invaded Venezuela. Oh, and now that Cuba doesn't have oil from either Russia or Venezuela, Cuba is now a target for Donald Trump. And there's lots of people in the U.S., warmongers, hawks, who want to invade Cuba. Yeah, Cuba has been an embarrassment for a long time. And it's been more than an embarrassment. There was the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the Soviet Union wanted to put short-range, rapid response nuclear weapons in Cuba. And when John Kennedy found out about that, he basically went toe-to-toe with the Soviet Union and told them get it out of there, because the flight time from Cuba to, say, Florida would be 3 minutes. So you'd have no warning. Anytime they wanted to, they could launch some kind of a missile in maybe 3 minutes, maybe 5. And that's a threat. So Cuba has always been a problem for the U.S. warmongers, and they're probably going to take Cuba now. Well, and they might even promise them, look, if you just surrender to us, let us run your country. No, so get rid of your leadership, get rid of your communism and your whatever we don't like, right? We'll run your country for you, like we run Puerto Rico. Then we'll give you the oil that's missing. We got lots of oil. We'll even give you Venezuelan oil. We control their oil. We'll let them sell oil to you. We'll buy the oil from Venezuela and give it to you. So there could be a lot of reasons why that would work for Cuba. But the point is, it's another conflict. It's just another war. And as soon as the Trump administration, after taking Venezuela, as soon as they take Cuba, then they're going to turn around and take back the Panama Canal. They're going to invade Panama. They'll take back the Panama Canal. And they kind of have to do that. The Chinese, this is interesting, the Chinese were using their Belt and Road Initiative to create port facilities in Panama, near one of the entrances. I think it was on the Pacific side. That makes sense. It was probably on the Pacific side. They created two port support facilities, right? Oh, and there was also plans, probably still are plans, to dig a second Panama Canal, a bigger one, to handle the bigger vessels that are now needing to cross from the Atlantic into the Pacific. Bigger oil tankers, bigger container ships, and the U.S. military. So the U.S. didn't want China to have control of Panama, because that's what the Chinese do with their Belt and Road Initiative. They come in, they throw money around, bribes, and then they sort of take over the country. Or at least they have a narrative that you have to do what we say, or we'll cut off the flow of money, or we'll cut off the flow of food, or whatever else it is. So under the Trump administration, I think it was Trump, might have even been his second term, they strong-armed Panama into getting rid of the Chinese influence and took over those facilities and kicked the Chinese out. As brutal as that. Just as brutal as that. And the next shoe to drop is going to be U.S. military on the ground in Panama. So, the end of that. And, then they might actually build the second canal, and they may build it big enough for U.S. military warships, and so on and so forth. But, this is the world we live in now. We live in this world of strategic imperialism, I guess. Venezuela was taken over. There you go. And the oil to China was cut off. There you go. Oh, and the oil to Cuba was cut off. So there you go. Another conflict that's going to erupt probably in 2026. Again, this is the poly crisis. Do I have to go back and pull that definition up again? I can do that. Is North Korea and South Korea. What's going to set that off? Well, if China invades Taiwan, North Korea absolutely, hands down, will attack South Korea. It's the best time for them to do that. The North Koreans want unification. South Korea is very rich. So, of course, the oligarchs in North Korea would like some of that money, right? Give me the money. So they want to invade South Korea. Unify the country. Yay, wave the flag. Money. And if the Chinese invade Taiwan and then the U.S. military is distracted there, then the North Koreans are going to invade South Korea. And then the U.S., in addition to, let's see, where will we be by then? Well, now we're probably middle of 2026, right? May, June, July, maybe August. Where is the U.S. now? They're riding herd on the Venezuelans. Probably if they've moved on Cuba and probably Panama. The U.S. and Israeli militaries are still at war in Iran. The war will have gotten much bigger. The Straits of Hormuz and the Bab al-Mandab Strait, which is the Red Sea, which is the Suez Canal, also gets closed. So oil tankers have stopped moving. The Chinese don't have oil. The Europeans don't have oil. Russia has run out of oil. Even for internal purposes, even for their own war machine, because the Ukrainians are being very clever about destroying the Russian oil infrastructure. So now Russia doesn't have oil. The Europeans don't have oil. European nations, about midsummer, maybe late summer, August, the European nations start to have problems. They don't have oil. The price of fuel is through the roof. Their manufacturing starts to shut down because they can't manufacture anything without crude oil. When that happens, then the people are angry. And plus, global heating. We're going to have a terrible summer because of the heat. Lots of people are predicting that now. It could be bad enough to cause mass fatality events. So, we have that to look forward towards the end of the summer. So about the end of the summer, the Europeans, hello Hazel, good to see you, check in on the chat. The Europeans will be running out of oil. It'll be hot. They'll have mass fatality events. There will be war going on basically every continent at that point. So, what are they going to be doing? What's it going to be like to be European at that point? Well, I don't know. They have Muslim populations in mostly France, I would say. The UK also. They will be unhappy because of all the war taking place in the Middle East. There might even be U.S. troops on the ground in, say, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE. These are our allies, and these are even allies with Israel. So there could be U.S. troops and Israeli troops on the ground helping to defend these countries towards the end of summer. And when the Muslim population finds out that there are foreigners in Saudi Arabia, the Holy Land and all that stuff, I'm not downplaying their concerns. I'm just saying that's what they're going to see. Then there's going to be riots all over the place. It was problems with the Muslims in Europe that caused Brexit. The British didn't want to have to take in African and Middle Eastern refugees, and they didn't like the problems with European nations failing to integrate Islamic refugees. No one thought of them as being Islamic refugees. They were African refugees. They were Syrian refugees. But the fact is they were Muslims. So the UK didn't want to take those people. So that got us Brexit. And Brexit got us Donald Trump, his first term. So now that whole thing continues to echo. And if now, because of the war in Iran, spilling over into Saudi Arabia, foreign troops on the ground in Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf nations, collapse of the oil infrastructure, again, what are we looking at? Russia's oil infrastructure is basically offline. Venezuela belongs to the U.S. now. Iran is taken offline. Saudi Arabia will be taken offline because of war. It won't. They have pipelines, so they can still export some materials, but the main traffic of oil tankers for both crude oil and liquefied natural gas, that will drop to zero. There's going to be nothing. And then the U.S. may stop selling oil around the world, in part because Donald Trump would have more power over like European nations. He could get more concessions. He could get more gold bars and all the things he likes to have. So he'll use the oil hammer to beat people up. But also maybe because there's such a problem with oil in the world in general that we just start hoarding our own oil, filling up the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the SPR, hoarding crude oil and maybe refined products in other ways, building more tank farms to store oil above ground, finding more ways below ground to store oil. That's where the SPR is. I think a good part of it is in what we call salt domes, where we pumped out the oil and natural gas and then they're empty, and so you can put it right back in there if you want to store it temporarily. So that's kind of the landscape going into late summer. Oil interruptions, the polycrisis, right? Let's take another look at that. Let's take a look at the polycrisis. What is the polycrisis? And this is, I'm making a big deal out of this because everyone needs to understand what I'm talking about. We don't have these types of thought patterns. We don't have thoughts about how problems augment each other and pile on and create bigger problems, and that it's not a linear 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. It's a 1 gives you 4, gives you 16, gives you 50 problems, okay? It's non-linear. It's chaotic. It's non-linear. Polycrisis, a time of great disagreement, confusion, or suffering that is caused by many different problems happening at the same time, so that they together have a very big effect. It's another way to say it. It's bigger than the sum of its parts. You get outsized effects in a polycrisis. The 2025 polycrisis is defined by the convergence of interconnected, cascading global risks that amplify one another, creating a perfect storm that threatens to overwhelm international systems. Major drivers in 2025 and now 2026, nothing has changed, include escalating geopolitical tensions, for example, Ukraine, the Middle East, and Taiwan, climate-driven disasters, AI-driven volatility, and severe social, political instability in Western nations. And that came from Google Gemini. So I don't think we have to argue about any of this. This is what's really happening to us. We really are in the middle of a polycrisis. And how do we get out? Well, you don't. You don't. The last time we were in a polycrisis, I guess you could call that World War II. But World War II was an extension of World War I in many important ways, and almost every historian would agree with that. And the problem, World War I was an extension of all the problems that created with imperialism. The conflict between the great imperialist nations, right? the British, the Germans, the French, the Italians, the Portuguese, the Spanish, eventually the U.S., all of them. And before that, the Dutch East India Company, and trying to conquer the world and beating each other up and having small wars and big wars, and it all spilled over into the First World War. So you could even say that was a polycrisis that began in, I don't know, the late 1800s and didn't really resolve itself ever? Maybe after the end of the Second World War, and then we had the Cold War. So did it ever resolve itself? Have we been in a polycrisis for 150 years? Maybe. I think somebody could make that point. And now we've added to that global heating, and now we've added to that interruptions to our dependency on fossil fuels, because we are dependent on fossil fuels for everything all the time, everybody, 100% of the time. So without fossil fuels everywhere, all the time, anytime, we can't go forward. This world, this global industrialized civilization, it doesn't have a story. Without ready, constant, and cheap availability of crude oil in particular, we have no way forward. And you can say that's not true, and you could say there's always going to be innovation, and the U.S. has plenty of crude oil and all this stuff, but we live in a highly integrated, global, industrialized base. I was just seeing another article today where people who want to buy an American car and they want to go to an American car manufacturer and buy an American car, they're going to be really surprised if China goes offline as a manufacturing facility, because they manufacture most of the parts that go into a so-called American car. American auto manufacturers assemble Chinese cars, basically. If all the parts are coming from China and they all say made in China, and then in the end you assemble it in a Detroit factory and put a Ford badge on the radiator, is it a Ford? I guess it's a Ford truck because you branded it on the radiator with a Ford badge or a Chevy badge or whatever else. But it was made in China. It was made in China. So there you go. You don't like that? Well, that's how it is. Your Ford truck is 90% made in China. Okay, most of it's China, some of it's Mexico, and some of it's Canada. So same story, right? American auto manufacturers have their own polycrisis. They're not getting parts from Canada anymore, and pretty soon they won't be getting parts from Mexico. And a week later, they won't be getting parts from China. Why? Because China's running out of crude oil. Because the U.S. is kind of screwing around with the energy supply for the planet. Pretty soon, Ford is going to be waving the white flag. Hey, we don't have parts to make our trucks. And then, of course, the price of a Ford truck triples, and the availability is cut to a tenth. You have to wait 10 times as long or look 10 times as hard even to find one. And then when you do find one, you have to pay 3 times as much. Market dynamics, right? That's capitalism for you. And, you thought your truck was made in America, but it wasn't. It was made in China and Mexico and Canada. None of which, under trade war, we have any working relationship with. Are Americans ready for that? No. Will they understand that when it happens? No. They won't understand anything. They don't understand any part of this world. And that's why people like, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping and all the others, the Ayatollah of Iran, that's why they can get away with this. Because no one really understands what's happening. When the U.S. and Israel attack Iran, people are like, oh no, not another one of those, right? It's like Afghanistan and Iraq and what is going on now? I don't even care. Well, you're going to care a lot when your shipments of crude oil stop. And then people will be confused. Wait, we don't have any gasoline. Or the gasoline at the pump has gone up 5 times in price. What happened? Someone's price gouging. Someone's taking advantage of a situation or something. This is the Biden administration raising prices. Something terrible has happened. Well, no. You attacked enough oil exporting countries and shut down enough of the oil infrastructure that all of a sudden the price of oil is $200 a barrel as opposed to $60. Now, the U.S. oil majors are going to love that. They'll love selling oil to Europe and to China and to Taiwan and to Japan, and even selling it back to the U.S. I mean, it comes out of our soil, but they sell it back to us, right? They're companies. It's all run by corporations. And they're going to love this. They're going to love making $200 a barrel for their oil. They're going to love it. And they're going to promote that. And if they can promote war to keep the price of oil up and the availability down, then they will totally do that. Because that's good for their company, and that's good for their profits. And it's good for their stock price. And that's part of the poly crisis. And people won't understand any of this. They just won't understand. They won't understand the smallest part of it. And when the global heating hits, and the price of gasoline is, what, $8 a gallon here in the U.S., and the price of food is going through the ceiling because, well, you know, crude oil, energy in general, determines the price of everything. Oh, you didn't know that? Well, yes, it does. When the availability of things starts to go down, and when global heating comes along and starts to impact all of that, crops fail, water becomes scarce, electricity becomes scarce, right? We're still building data centers, and we're going to run those. Oh, yes, we're going to run the data centers. But now, oh, look, a lot of our reservoirs have gone offline. That generated a lot of our electricity. Oh, look, it's too hot to run the nuclear power plants because they need cooling. But when it's really hot outside, they can't cool, so we have to shut them down. So we don't operate outside of safe conditions. And pretty soon, the availability for electricity and the price of electricity, it just goes completely off the rails. And people are going to be upset about that. They're going to be angry. They're going to want to blame somebody. And, well, what happens then? You've got authoritarians in all the major democracies. You've got oligarchs running everything behind the scenes, right? Rich people running everything. And they're going to make up a story. And most people, certainly all Americans, 99% of Americans and most people elsewhere in the world will buy the story. Say, oh, that's what happened? Oh, no, that's terrible. And what will the story be? I don't know, immigrants? I mean, that's the usual fallback, right? It's because of the immigrants. Or it's because of, what else could it be? Wokeism? I don't know, communism? They'll come up with something, right? They'll come up with some boogeyman, somebody they can blame other than themselves, other than their wars for oil and their wars for, imperialist control. They're not going to blame any of it on that. So they'll blame it on somebody who they can point a finger at, say, that guy over there, those people over there, these over there. This is your problem. The Somalis, the Mexican immigrants, go after them. Don't come after me. I'm just a rich guy minding my own business. And, I didn't start that war in the Middle East. I mean, I probably did because I wanted the price of oil to go up, and that was good for my company. But I didn't start it. I mean, I didn't fly a jet and bomb Iran. I don't even own any jets like that. That was the U.S. government. That was the Israelis. They had reasons for doing that. And I didn't make Russia invade Ukraine. They had their own reasons for doing that. And, everyone will say, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. No, go blame somebody else, and no one will understand whose fault it is. Well, it's your dependency on crude oil and how that's basically going offline. Now, I did a video here over the weekend, I guess. Maybe it was Monday. About how war in the Middle East is going to save us from global heating, possibly. Maybe. I mean, we're in trouble already, and that doesn't change just because you deprive people of their access to fossil fuels. So if they can't drive, they can't fly, they can't move goods around the planet. Doesn't mean we save ourselves from global heating. It still gets hot, and then it stays hot for 100,000 years, and so that's bad. But maybe it stops getting worse. That sounds okay, but we have to stop burning fossil fuels. So one way in which we save ourselves is we just have a big fucking war, in particular with all the oil exporting countries. That's interesting. How'd that happen? Russia's been taken offline. That was a big one. And then Venezuela. Oh, what a coincidence. And now Iran and Saudi Arabia and all the Gulf states are taken offline. Well, how'd that happen? Well, that's really strange. Oh, so we don't have gasoline to burn? And then I guess we can't heat the planet anymore with carbon emissions. So that's one in the plus column. Oh, and then the other thing that happens, and this probably will happen towards the end of summer too, maybe fall, possibly fall, maybe 2027, about the time my book starts, chapter 2027. Yes, I'm naming the chapters after years. Collapse of industrialization, a collapse of manufacturing, collapse of the airline industry. They're already in trouble. There's going to be more and more places where you can't fly in or out as these wars continue. You won't be able to fly in and out of large parts of Europe. They just won't have the fuel. You won't be able to fly in and out of any part of the Middle East, and probably China as well. And if South Korea and North Korea are at war, you won't be able to fly in and out of there, or Japan, for that matter. There'll be fewer and fewer destinations all the time. And as the economy implodes, there will be less consumerism. More companies start to go bankrupt. People start to lose their jobs as companies don't sell products, don't sell services, and go bankrupt. And so people lose their jobs. And when they lose their job, they don't have money. I mean, that's how it happens, right? When they don't have money, they can't participate in the consumer economy, which is the stepchild of capitalism. And this is called the death spiral. Economists will tell you can't have a death spiral. You have to do whatever you have to do to avoid that. And there's various theories on how to avoid an economic death spiral. I think the theories probably have some basis in reality, but they've never worked. How did we get out of the Great Depression in the 30s? Well, we had the Second World War. There you go. Suddenly everybody had a job. Suddenly the governments were printing money. Suddenly the governments were throwing money around in the landscape. We need to manufacture airplanes. We need to manufacture tanks and bombs and bullets and guns. And so you have a war economy. And the government is piling money into the war economy, and everyone has a job, everyone gets paid, and that's the end of the Depression. Easy peasy. So, as countries find themselves going into depressions and a death spiral where people are losing jobs, have no money, then they can't buy, and that causes businesses to shut down, and that fires people, which then have no job, and they don't have any money, and they can't spend money. That causes more businesses to shut down and let their employees go, with more people with no money. That death spiral, right down the drain, right? Go to war. We're just going to go to war. Put all these men to work. Well, as soldiers, of course, and if you start killing a bunch of men, then that's fewer people to feed. So your country is better off that way. And then everyone gets a paycheck from the government until the government goes bankrupt, but they're hoping they don't. And some of this hinges on whether or not we have oil. As of today, what is it, March 3rd, as we enter World War III, the World War III is starting in the oil patch. It started with Russia and Ukraine going at it, and Russia eventually having their oil infrastructure blown back into the Stone Age. But it continues from there. Do we collapse the global economy now? Probably. I think so. I think we do. The interdependencies and the reliance on a stable Earth system to grow food and to have water availability and all that. All these assumptions about just-in-time, manufacturing here and shipping there, cheap fossil fuels, reliable crop yields, artificial fertilizers, artificial irrigation, all these things that we've cobbled together over the last 20, 30, 50, 100 years that we've been doing industrialization and getting increasingly better at it, and getting increasingly dependent on fossil fuels, and becoming increasingly dependent on the Earth system to be regular and predictable. As all that worked, then we got where we are as of last week. And now that it's all under threat and there's a risk that it's not going to work in the future, then we have to start thinking about the poly crisis. We're going down. It's going to be a slow process. There'll be no question that it started in 2025, maybe even as far back as the COVID pandemic, so maybe 2021, or even far back as the Russian invasion of Crimea, who knows how far back, you pick your date, right? Pick whenever you think it wanted to happen. But now we're in the thick of it. We're in the thick of it now, boys and girls, and we're not. I don't know when this ends. I know how it ends. It ends with complete civilizational collapse, because civilization can't operate like this. Civilization, the one we have known for a good 50 years, definitely since the fall of the Soviet Union, where it became increasingly dependent, one nation on the other during peacetime, right? That's the nice thing about peacetime, is you can do trade with each other. When you're at war with each other, you can't do trade. But when you're at peace, you can do trade. And one of the reasons that Europe was so quickly brought up from the ashes of the Second World War, which were just the ashes on top of the First World War, right? So it's not like they had a lot of time to fix themselves. But as they did fix themselves after the Second World War, the reason they were able to do that is because of global trade. Everybody focused on the thing they could do really well. This is a principle of economics. Your nation focuses on the things that your nation does well. And maybe it's because of your resources, or maybe it's because your people have a certain cultural affinity for certain types of work. But whatever your country does well, maybe tourism, whatever it is, then that's your export, and that's how you make money, and that's how you get rich. And so during the Cold War, and certainly since the end of the Soviet Union, there's been a lot of trade. The Russians, the last survivor of the Soviet Union, inherited the mantle of the Soviet Union. The Russians were selling natural gas and oil to the Europeans, and they were doing really well. They got really rich. Now, they were a one-trick pony, and that one trick wasn't that great of a trick, it turns out. But they had a lot of money, and so Vladimir Putin started thinking he can do things with that money. Well, turns out he wasn't able to do cool things with that money, but he tried, and then he kind of set off the Third World War. And now we're in the thick of it now. We're in the thick of it. China becomes desperate, and they start, what would they do? Would China try to put an end to the war in the Middle East just to get at the oil? If they're desperate enough, they might do that. How would they do that? Would they resort to attacking Taiwan and distracting everybody? They could distract the U.S. if they attack Taiwan, and if North Korea could be induced to attack South Korea, then the U.S. would have to leave the Middle East. So there you go. That's the end of that. Another incentive. The Chinese need incentives. Well, now they have another one. They need to end the war in the Middle East. They need to start getting that crude oil from Iran again. And they would like to end the war in Ukraine. Now, how would they do that? I don't know. Invade Taiwan? Maybe. Does that end the war in Ukraine? Do the Europeans stop supplying resources to Ukraine to fight the war, and just encourage them to make peace with Russia and give up territory and become a vassal state of Russia and just end the war so that they can focus on dealing with the Chinese in Taiwan and dealing with the Middle East? Well, they might. Who knows? This is geopolitics. No one knows what's going to happen. Everybody has a different story at this point, right? But it's a polycrisis. And just about the time you think you got a handle on it, you don't. You think you've got a handle on it, and you don't. And you never do. You never do again. Not after that. Not after it kicks off and it becomes, well, whatever it is going to become. Whatever we're due to get. Whatever we're going to get, we're now going to get it. And, okay, so be it. Here we go. My concern is that the planet gets hot this summer. And during a war, that's not the best thing. That's a bad thing to have happen. The actual physical heat. Physics catches up with you just about the time you thought you were waging war and winning or holding your own or making a point. Then the heat comes. And then we'll see what happens. The effects of a polycrisis are impossible to predict because it is dominated by chaos. And you can predict that. See, that's the irony. You can predict that a polycrisis will be unpredictable. You know that. You know that unexpected things will happen. And where do we end up? Well, I guess we'll see. And I'll have more thoughts on this later, and especially as the weather starts to turn and as World War III ramps up and spreads out and involves more players, and as more players start to take advantage of the chaos, and as more players get forced into doing things they didn't really want to do and no one thought they would ever do, like China invading Taiwan or North Korea invading South Korea. Or who knows? Japan invading North Korea. Who really knows, right? As players get forced into doing things that maybe were unthinkable, then this goes different directions. And here we are. Here we go. Good luck, I guess. I mostly talk on this channel about global heating, but it really is one component of an ongoing, continuing, growing set of threats to civilization. It's the threat to civilization that comes to us from physics. So in some ways it's the worst. We can have wars or not have them. We can create trade agreements or not have them. We can disrupt the global economy, or we can not, or we can repair it, or we can create different economies. But you can't ignore physics. And if we're heading into a very bad, very lethal heat regime on Earth, then that never goes away. It just doesn't go away. You think, well, it's weather, so it changes. Yeah, it'll change, but it never goes away. We just had the hottest winter ever in the United States of America. Christmas Day was the hottest Christmas Day ever in America. We're already in the jaws of this thing. We're in trouble. We're in big trouble here in the U.S. And people are going to find out what that means. I can predict what that means, but I don't even have to. People are going to find out what that means. It's going to mean running out of water, running out of electricity, not having air conditioning. You didn't need it before. Now you do, but you can't get it because it comes from China, and they're not going to give you any because they're not manufacturing anymore. Whatever, right? It's a polycrisis. And my recommendation for people is find some way to live underground. And if you can't live underground, then at least find a place underground where you can go to avoid the heat. And will people do that? No. Not even to save themselves. They won't do that. Because they won't get it. People just won't get it. It's weird to say that, but they won't get it. We're heading into a polycrisis. War, manufacturing collapse, unavailability of fuels, heat waves, right? Dead bodies in the streets, dead bodies coming back in war, refugee crises. The Iranians are going to have to leave Iran because they're running out of water. Where are they going to go? Syria, Iraq, the rest of the Middle East, Europe. I don't know where the Iranians are going to go, but they're going to have to go somewhere because there's no water. And now they're at war, and they're refugees, and they're going to have to leave. And where are they going to go? I don't know. We're going to find out, right? We're going to find out. And will they be welcomed into the UK? No. Will they be welcomed in Europe? Probably not. Will they be welcomed in China? Of course not. Where are they going to go? They're going to go somewhere, and they're going to be angry. Good luck. Good luck with that, people. Start paying attention. Start recognizing that you are in a polycrisis. Start recognizing that all of this stuff is all tied together in weird ways. One thing leading to another. It's like a Netflix mini special, right? All these conspiracies and all these conspirators and all the Illuminati and the reptilians, and they're all doing something, and it's all meant to drag you down and take away your freedoms and your guns. And it could be a Netflix miniseries, but it's not. It's reality. Here you go. 2026. We've kicked it off. And will the historians look back and say, well, it started in 2025 with the 12-day war in Iran, and it started in March 2026 with the U.S. and the Israelis bombing Iran and taking out the leadership, or did it start in, April of 2026 or May of 2026, they'll look back. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll never look back and say this was when this Third World War started and this is how it ended. Maybe no one ever will. Maybe all the historians end up being just like the rest of us. Thirsty, hungry, refugees on the road trying to find food, clothing, shelter, and no time to write history. So we're making history today. I'm here talking about history in advance. You're going to have to do the best you can, folks. Once again, do the best you can to be on the proper side of the tracks when this train comes rolling through and taking us out, as it does. And yes, I'm writing a book about a polycrisis. Ariadne, I got to get it done because, like everything else, it's speculative fiction now, but in 6 months or a year or 18 months, it'll be a documentary. No, not what I was looking forward to. Not what I was looking forward to living through. I don't mind writing it up as fiction, but I didn't want to live it. Well, there we go. Good luck, and as usual, my advice to anybody here is don't die.